let's create our first table. So like I said, we're going to be doing a message board today with Postgres. I kind of tried to choose like a good problem for each one of these. So they're not exactly going to be the same problem. Whereas like a pet adoption app is good for Mongo. Something that's more relational, like a message board, is really good for a relational database. So we're going to say create table. Now, something I'm going to tell you up front, it's optional to capitalize all this stuff. So you can totally say create table like this. It'll get it. For your benefit and in general, people tend to capitalize the command so they can see the difference very quickly between what they're inputting and what is like a official SQL kind of thing. If you're feeling lazy, like I often do when I'm writing SQL, feel free to just put everything in lowercase. Just know that that's why I'm capitalizing it. It's hopefully for your benefit. So create table users, open parenthesis. We're going to create a table here, and we're going to have a user ID. And this is going to be, you can put this as int or integer. I'm going to put integer just for this one. We're going to make this a primary key. So a primary key means that like this is the thing that the database is primarily going to index this on. So MongoDB had that underscore ID. This is that, but for this. And then we're going to have always our generated always as identity. This is going to be an auto-incrementing ID. So the first record that we're going to insert into this database, or table rather, is going to have ID 1. The next will have ID 2, then ID 3, then ID 4. And it will keep track of that for us. We don't have to keep track of it. That's what this generated always as identity means. That's what it's for. In previous versions of Postgres, this was called a serial. If you're familiar with Postgres, you might have seen that before. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's really close. The reason why they switched to generated always as identity, this is actually part of the official SQL spec. So there is an SQL spec that all of these like SQL Server and Postgres and MySQL share. And for the most part, they're relatively compatible. But serial was a Postgres thing, and so they wanted to come back to the official SQL way of doing it. And so that's why they came into generated always as identity. So for example, I think this create table statement that we're about to issue, I think it would work as is with MySQL, for example. Not all of them will, but some of them will. User ID, okay. Then we're going to have a username. We have to tell it what kind of thing it is, whereas this was an integer, right, which is going to be a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? The username, we want it to be a string of characters, right? So in SQL, you call that a varchar, or a variable amount of characters, or a string. So this varchar, we're going to give it a length. We're going to say usernames can only be 25 long. That's what this means. It's going to be unique. So no two people can have the same username. I think that makes sense. And we're going to say this is never null, which means if you're going to insert into this database, you must include a username or I will not accept this query. Okay, same thing with email. Varchar, we'll make this 50. I don't know if that's a good length for emails. It's probably too short, but that's what we're doing for now. Unique, not null. Okay, full name, varchar 100, not null. I don't know if full name 100 is, that's probably not long enough either. Like the King of Thailand couldn't put his name in there. If you've never looked at the King of Thailand's name, look at it. It's a lot. Last login. We'll make this a timestamp. So what we're going to do here is we're going to, every time that the user logs in, we're going to log that they've logged in with this last login. And this is useful for if someone doesn't log in for like 6 months, you can just say, all right, clear out all of the people that haven't logged in 6 months. This one can be null, right? So if someone creates an account and never logs in, this could be null, right? So we're not going to put not null. And then we're going to do a created on of when they created this account. This will be a timestamp that's not null. Okay, and there you go. We now have created a table. If we put /d, you can see here we have a users table, as this first one represents. And then the second one, it creates this little sequence type that it uses that to keep track of where we are in that auto incrementing ID. So all of those auto incrementing IDs will have their own little sequence in this, list of relations thing. So something you can do, instead of using a varchar, you can use something called text, which is a different kind of data type. That basically says that we're not putting an upper limit on it. It can be like 65,000 characters-ish. I think 65,000 is the right one. But with varchar, we can just say like there's a hard cap at this, that we don't want people to have 65,000 character emails. There's a lot of types of Postgres data. I dropped a link there into the course notes of all the various different kinds of data types for Postgres. Feel free to check that out if you're interested in seeing what other types are available, or there will be probably a course note on that as well. All right, so now we have a table. The table is empty, so let's go ahead and insert something into that table. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to do insert into. This is going to allow us to do an insert into the database. So we're going to insert into users, that's the name of our table, and we're going to insert a username. So we have to actually type out the name of the columns or the fields that we're going to be putting in. Email, full name, and created on, like that. And then we're going to say values. And this is going to be the, we're just going to go in that same order. So the username we're going to say is BT Holt. By the way, you must use single quotes here. Do not use double quotes. In SQL or SQL, you have to use single quotes. Some emails, so lol@example.com. Name is Brian Holt. And then this is going to be the created on, and so we want the created on to be right now, right? Because I'm creating my account right now, so I'm going to say now, like that. That's a function built into Postgres that's going to give me the current timestamp back. Okay, I'm going to close this parenthesis right here, put a semicolon at the end, and you can see here I have an insert 01. This one represents that I successfully inserted something into my database. The 0 represents the OID, which we're not covering nor using throughout the span of this course, so no worries about it. Just, yeah, it's not something we're going to cover. It's not important. All right, so now we've inserted something into our database. That is like at the base level how you insert things into SQL. This language here, this create table, this insert into, this is what SQL looks like. It almost reads like English sometimes, so, which is nice. I like SQL for that reason. It ends up being fairly readable. So now I want to get it out. I want to read from the database. How would I do that? Well, the most basic, easy way to do that is you say select star, which is going to mean everything, right? Select everything from users like that. And you can see here, this will read back everything that I inserted into users. So select is basically saying, get this stuff out of the database. Star is saying, I don't want to do any projection, right? This is where you would do the projection part. We talked about that in MongoDB. If I wanted to do that, I would just say select username and maybe full name, like that. And this would only select username and full name, and it would leave everything else behind. So the star is a wildcard, it means select everything from it. And you just say from which table? From users. Notice here in last login, it's null, right? Because we didn't provide it, so it just says like, oh, okay, you didn't give it to me. That's got to be null. So this user, BT Holt, has never logged into our system. So there's a good question here. Is there a default length, or do we always have to specify a length for each field? With varchar, you do have to specify how long the string is, or how long the string could potentially be. Again, if you use that text field, that's kind of how you're saying, I give up. There's no upper bounds on this. use as much space as necessary. There's some other subtle differences between varchar and text that probably outside the scope of this class, but it has to do with like how much you can query from them.